Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Go to strengthguild.com, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to the Iron Radio collections, and we've got new shirts and new banners for you to support the show. Everything from just a regular banner or regular shirt to ones with sayings on them, like Lonnie's Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree shirt. And some news for you, we're going to have some contests for people who own these shirts and things. So if you support the show, we'll let you more on that later. So if you get in on these early, you can be one of the first people to win some prizes. So thank you very much. Go check out the site, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to Iron Radio Collections and support the show.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiology and nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
Hey, this is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. I'm a professor at the Kerrigan Institute, creator of the Flex Diet Cert, and I'm back home after spending a week doing a bunch of neuro rehab, and I also haven't had any caffeine for 6 days until just now. So
wow.
I know. It was crazy. I'm like, well, maybe I should dry myself out at the same time.
You know how I dry myself out? You're going to laugh at this, but like I didn't have any caffeine. Like when I have to get up really early, I actually bite a caffeine pill in half and hit the snooze button, right? Like the caffeine snooze trick.
Caffeine power nap.
Right. Yeah, my brother used to do it in the afternoon, like straight up power nap. I just do it like because I'm getting old enough that I'm just not going to be jumping out of bed bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then I can make it to the coffee pot, and then I drink. The funny thing, though, because like Kelly always jokes, like caffeine to make it to your caffeine, Yeah. But first of all, I think caffeine's a pretty good drug, but when you use it wisely. Also, I drink half-calf coffee, so that way I'm not stacking full calf onto the caffeine pill, right? So I don't go to work jittering and, lecturing like an auctioneer. And so when I dry out, like I've actually, the past couple days, it's funny you said that, I haven't done that, right? Because I'm a teacher in the summer, so it's online. It's not like I have to be somewhere, by 7:30 this morning in the lab or whatever. So I've been eschewing the caffeine pill and just drinking the half calf. But I'm telling you, by itself, it doesn't do a lot. It doesn't do a lot. Anyway.
Yeah. I also have this weird thing, even when I use caffeine, which is most of the time, I like caffeine and coffee. I try so hard not to do it in the morning. So if I can get through my little morning routine, do some aerobic stuff, go for a walk, jump in the freezer, that kind of thing. Because I find if I start using caffeine that early in the morning, the amount I use just gets crazy.
Oh.
And then I feel like I don't have any sort of gauge where my body is other than measuring heart rate variability and some other stuff.
Yep.
So I kind of force myself to sometimes suffer through the morning just so I don't fall into the habit of otherwise I would be drinking coffee 24/7.
Yeah, I kind of do that when I'm at work. I think the students always laugh. It's funny how they identify me. They don't realize that a lot of times I'm drinking, half calf. I can't bring myself to drink straight decaf for some reason. But
we finally found a couple of decafs that are actually not too bad, but yeah, even then, only on rare occasions do I go for the decaf.
Yep. And professional segue, we're going to talk about superfoods. And I think coffee probably is one of those, honestly. The phytochemicals and everything in the coffee, and people get more antioxidants in the U.S. from coffee, according to several reports, than from fruits and vegetables. I mean, wow. Anyhow, so that's what we're going to talk about after we do some mail and news, everybody, is Mike and I are going to give our top 3 superfoods, maybe defining that and whatnot after the break. So if you don't like the news, you can skip forward now. But mail and news, let's do this here. This first one, Fortress sent this to me. So,
Strength and muscle sport news.
He's alive.
Yeah, he's alive. He's just not, he just forwards me stuff, and I appreciate it. And honestly, I keep the web link on IronRadio.org pointing to him, just to poke the bear. And then he just sends me stuff, and then he'll call me every once in a while. But so this is from Gary. He says, I'm a longtime listener. I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts or review of the products from Jackish Medical. I've heard this guy on another podcast. He made some pretty extreme claims about the product. Thanks, Gary. I did take a quick look at this, Gary, and my skeptical, salty old professor mind sees some, I'm just going to say marketing tropes that I've seen in other circumstances, right? Now, maybe you have to do some of that, right? Mike and I actually wrestle with this behind the scenes when we come up with show topics and stuff. Like, is this tired? And it's like, well, that's what people are asking. And so I see a lot of the typical kinds of marketing things going on there. It looks like there's a combination of as I just browsed around briefly, vibration platforms, bands, like exercise bands. And there's some claims about GH release and that kind of stuff. But Mike, you said you were somewhat familiar. Any gold nuggets you picked out of this, or your thoughts?
Yeah, so the main product, as far as I can tell, is an X3 bar, which is a bar with just a band around it, which is kind of a cool idea. I mean, I think if you're, traveling and you're trying to replicate some movements in the gym, but you just, don't have a lot of space, it's probably kind of a cool idea, because you could simulate bands with deadlifts and bench press and other things with the bar that, if you only had bands, are harder to do. And also with bands itself, a lot of times holding on to them is kind of tricky, so having a bar is probably a little bit better. I mean, my bias, if you have access to weights and dumbbells and stuff, I don't know if it's going to be very superior. I don't know what that would be based on. But again, I think it depends on what are you using it for, and hey, if you don't have access to a gym, you don't have dumbbells, and you can get a setup like that and do different exercises, probably good. Doing some stuff like that once in a while as a adjunct, I think is fine. You can make an argument for all sorts of stuff, from flywheel based devices to isometrics to everything else.
Good point. Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be superior than weight training, or that grow muscle 3 times faster than with weights, which I don't know about that.
Right. Yeah. The growth 3 times faster, or I'm not a big fan of the Amazon-esque looking check mark, like green check boxes next to all of, the in-house products, and then dumbbells have a couple of green checks, but then some red X's. Yeah. And everybody that listens to our show, I think, knows that dumbbells are a tool, and they can be used very effectively for different purposes. Like if you're after GH release, you might do some more rapid succession sets, a little bit more explosive, intense. Maybe you're fasted. I mean, there's different ways that you can approach a workout depending on your goals. And so, to say that, it's superior for GH release or something like that. I mean, let's face it, GH release in guys our age during exercise is pretty minimal anyway. Yeah. And that kind of stuff. And is it going to transform your physique? No. And so I like what you said about you could actually find literature to support, if you want to cherry pick, almost any approach as being superior in some way. So that's why you need a balanced, outlook. And again, even when it's evidence-based, you can find evidence on multiple sides. So it's in my opinion, I know you were just saying this, Mike, before we hit the record button, it's better just to have a more honest, sobering, instead of making extreme claims. And again, maybe exercising, marketers, they need to do that to get people's attention these days. But I find people appreciate just a sober, honest approach, Yeah,
obviously that's our bias, and maybe that costs us some money too, which is fine. I don't really care anymore. But
yeah, it's true.
Everyone's gonna always gravitate towards the stuff they would buy too, So that's always what's hard about that. I have listened to, I think he also does OsteoStrong, and I've listened to a podcast he had on that, and that was actually kind of super interesting about trying to do specific things to target bone growth, especially in older people. So I thought that was actually kind of cool and seemed to be pretty interesting, at least from a biomechanics standpoint. But haven't used the bar or anything like that. And again, I think it goes back to, what are you trying to do if you're traveling all the time and you've got a limited space? Probably a cool thing to bring with. If you've got an access to a full gym, is using some type of band setup going to be superior? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Most acute hormone release stuff, hasn't panned out, right? We've had Dr. Stu Phillips on here before. Dr. David West did all those original studies from Stu's lab. Granted, those are looking at testosterone, not GH. There's, I would say, out of all the anabolic hormones you can try to affect with exercise and resistance training, I'd say growth hormone is one of those that's a maybe. Like, we do know that it will increase levels relatively high, but it's really mixed if those levels have any effect. We know for testosterone and pretty much everything else that's been studied quite in depth, it doesn't seem to matter from resistance training. So I would hedge my bets on that, growth hormone I'd still say is maybe a maybe from a health and maybe soft tissue perspective, but even super physiologic GH from a muscle growth standpoint doesn't do much. It's
Good
more
call.
Fat loss,
yeah,
that type of thing.
Exactly. Lipolytic stuff, fat loss stuff.
Yeah.
I think people need to realize when they see pro bodybuilders, of course, and a lot of our listeners know this, but it's the polypharmacy. It's super physiologic amounts,
GH.
right, of GH with testosterone and then other accoutrement. Yeah.
That's a whole nother realm, because now you're elevating stuff that doesn't even go up normally together. So who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to throw out that caveat in case somebody said, "Hey, you guys are saying test and GH don't matter." Listen, within normal physiologic ranges. Right. It's not going to transform you, is all we're saying. Yeah. Plus, when I talk about the usual fitness tropes, or even more, when I see someone constantly referring to themselves as the scientist, or in this case, even beyond that, the Tony Stark of fitness. Oh boy. I maybe you have to throw modesty out the window if you're going to get people's attention and stuff like that. I don't know, but obviously, when someone goes on about they're a metabolic expert or a scientist, these are very vague terms, and I would just ask people to go look and see what the person's training was. What are your degrees in, and what's your research in, and things like that, to try to validate why you should be listening, I guess. So.
Yeah, that's always my thing too. It's like if someone says they're a doctor or whatever, just, it should be relatively easy to figure out where they got their degree from. And, if they've published anything, so if they're doing a PhD, the assumption is you've probably got to publish some stuff. That's just part of the process and how it works. And I always get a little bit leery when you can't poke around a website for a while and figure out, like, where their degree is from. You just have no idea about it.
Or in what? Doctor of what?
yeah, that always makes me a little nervous.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there you go, Gary. Again, it's what you're going to get from us, right? I know skepticism doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Which is why Iron Radio is tiny, at least as far as like YouTube and stuff like that. And speaking of such, Michelle was reminding me, because of course she's understands business better than I do, and she's like, don't forget to tell people to go check out the taste test on YouTube. And
that's right.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple hundred views of it, and that's fine. Interesting stuff, because normally, of course, we just use YouTube as an audio backup, and the video is getting looked at a little bit more than our audio only uploads. I mean, go figure, people go to YouTube to see videos. But let me get on to a little bit of news here before we get to the mid-show break. This first one I saw floating around the web, and I even saw some commentary from Jerry Branham. And I like Jerry. He's an old-school bodybuilder. Yeah. We've had him on the show before.
I remember reading his stuff decades ago.
Yeah, and he's sort of a science journalist, and he's not one of these guys who's going to boast that he's the scientist, Tony Stark of fitness or something like that. He's just kind of saying, listen, I'm just an old school bodybuilder. I'm a science journalist. I do the best I can to make this digestible. So even he was talking about this. And since I've been talking about hormones and viral infections. This is about melatonin. So I don't know if you've heard anything about melatonin and its possible role here, but like in COVID-19 and whatnot. But this was published actually back in 2013 in the Italian Journal of Pediatrics. Melatonin, its possible role in the management of viral infections. A brief review. So I just wanted to put this out there. I should offer the upfront caveat. I believe it was the Canadian Nutrition Society. They just issued like an infographic that said there is no food that you can eat or no supplement you can take that's going to protect you from COVID-19. But that should go without saying. At the same time, there are some things that are interesting, that may help, like fish oil. So we talked about before, and reducing some of those inflammatory cytokines so you don't get your lungs, all inflamed, at least as badly. There's some interesting stuff about coconut fat and MCTs being hard on viruses. I mean, there are some different things that could be supportive or helpful indirectly, but obviously nothing's going to really help as far as preventing it. But this is by Silvestri and Rossi. It says melatonin shows immunoregulatory, free radical scavenger, and antioxidant functions. Because of these characteristics, melatonin has also been found to be effective in fighting viral infections in a variety of experimental animal and in vitro, right, in a dish, models. These data suggest a possible therapeutic potential of melatonin in human virus-induced disorders. So in the intro portion, it just goes to say what most of us know, which is melatonin is the major neurohormone secreted by your pineal gland. It functions to help regulate circadian rhythm, right? Your body recognizing day length and whatnot. It acts in virtually every cell in an organism. Melatonin has been reported to possess numerous additional functions, being involved in not just sleep initiation, but vasomotor control, anti-excitatory actions. And of course, you get drowsy when you take melatonin. That's sort of the idea for a lot of people. And regulating mitochondrial function. Now, so I wanted to dig into this paper just a little bit, and it's rather indirect, but it is interesting, especially because I occasionally use melatonin, to get to sleep and all that sort of thing. Modulation of the immune inflammatory process and antioxidant activity. It says, besides being produced by the pineal gland, melatonin is also made by many other organs, including the gastrointestinal tract, retina, leukocytes, both in peripheral blood and in bone marrow. Stimulated human lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are going to help defend you from viruses, everybody. There's T and B cells. We don't want to go into a lecture here. But stimulated human lymphocytes synthesize and release large amounts of melatonin. Melatonin produced by these non-endocrine organs is not regulated by circadian rhythms, but rather responds to other signals. It says T lymphocytes, natural killer cells, eosinophils, and mast cells possess melatonin receptors. So that's, of course, suggesting that they're going to respond to melatonin. Why else would they have the receptor for it? It says melatonin administration increases the proliferative response of rat lymphocytes. So again, you ramp up your lymphocyte protection in the presence of melatonin. Increases the number of natural killer cells, stimulates the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-1 and TNF-alpha, and enhances phagocytosis. So again, increasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, this is why this kind of stuff is a two-edged sword, Does it help your immune response, or do you end up having one of these cytokine storms where you don't want too much? But anyway, so they give one example of a protective effect of melatonin in a respiratory virus infection, RSV. It says pre-treatment of the animals with melatonin resulted in marked reduction of acute lung oxidative injury. And there's some interesting stuff on here. There's a nice little figure, too, in this paper, which shows melatonin decreasing lung injury, decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, at least as far as like in this this model. Increasing antioxidant protection, decreasing inflammatory cell recruitment, again, in response to this lung virus, this RSV. So there is some stuff out there that you can find that melatonin may be one of those things that we're just going to dance around a little and say supportive, potentially. If you're fit, you exercise, you eat lots of fruits and vegetables, you get your omega-3s, maybe some MCT oil, that kind of stuff. And now add melatonin to the mix. It's just the kind of stuff a lot of people that follow a fitness lifestyle, it might set the stage in a nice way that they don't end up with a cytokine storm and on a vent. Right.
Yeah. I found another article that was open access in Frontier's therapeutic algorithm for use of melatonin in patients with COVID-19.
Nice.
This was published May 15th, 2020.
Excellent.
So it talks a little bit about basically kind of what you were saying there, but it's open access, and if people want to read it, and it gives some nice background similar to what you talked about there too.
Yep. So you could see that with melatonin. You could find a lot of stuff with the two-edged sword of testosterone. Like, you don't want to be low, but maybe you don't want to be real high, because they're suggesting the young men who get it, the ones that end up in the hospital, might actually be high T. So it's just constantly information coming out. In fact, the very first video that I put on YouTube actually talked about hormones in COVID-19. I left it up long enough that I could make sure everything was working, and it was real information. I mean, it was evidence-based, it was a reference list and everything, but I thought, I'm not even going to leave this up because stuff comes out so rapidly on COVID-19 and what may help and what may not. And again, some of these things like testosterone are could go either way, and it's just developing too quickly. So we'll leave that to the CDC and some of the people that are constantly got their fingers on the pulse of it, I think.
Yeah, I have this, I don't know what your opinion is, but I have this fear that we're going to look back a couple of years once we maybe get a vaccine or it dies down or whatever, and I wonder how much of the data that's been forced out in such a rapid fashion, which is a good thing, is going to end up getting pulled. Because it doesn't take too long to find some stuff where you're like, how the hell did this get published?
Yeah. It's true, because there's a lot of speculation, even amongst researchers, right? And is it going to get replicated again and again? That's the burden of science,
Yeah. So I'm not thinking so much just reviews, and it's on one hand it's good because I don't think science has ever really moved that fast, probably ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely needed,
Mm-hmm.
but I get more worried about the quality control and all the other aspects that go in there too, and like you said, we don't even know how many of these will be able to be replicated from that too. So
right, yeah. When I was reading this, and I actually ended up doing a mini lit review, whether it's sex hormones potentially being protective, and again, depending on which way the data ends up, but a lot of this stuff. One thing that stuck out as far as orders of magnitude more influential was if you are pre-diabetic or diabetic, you're really in trouble. And if you're obese and don't exercise actually corrects a lot of the problems with obesity when it comes to some of these cytokine storms and that kind of stuff, anti-inflammatory effects. But if you're obese and pre-diabetic, you are, the one paper I read said up to 10 times more likely to end up with a severe infection. And meanwhile, the sex hormone stuff is like double, plus or minus 100% kind of thing, but 10 times with the pre-diabetes and the diabetes. It's just such an inflammatory state with the high blood sugar. And I was reading all this stuff about people that are obese. They shed virus much longer. They have a much higher viral load because it compromises your immune system. So obviously everything that we do at Iron Radio, whether it's thinking about superfoods that we're going to talk about after the break, or exercising in general, I mean, my goodness, even if it's just starting with a morning outdoor walk, it could, move you in the right direction. So, okay.
Yeah. So I think people forget that, like you mentioned, exercise has very positive effects on the immune system overall if done in a semi-intelligent fashion.
Yes, totally. I mean, I looked at the leukocytosis of exercise as part of my dissertation, and you get a nice flushing of white blood cells out of your pulmonary vasculature. You kind of tickle the bone marrow, hey, make some more. It's very helpful. Mm-hmm. And yet, even though we've all been very inflamed with DOMS and muscle soreness acutely, chronically, exercise has an anti-inflammatory effect. It has a nice immunoregulating effect, not to mention it makes your heart and lungs stronger. So when they're challenged, they're just stronger. Totally. Okay. One more piece of news before we go to the break here. Speaking of the immune system, This is from May 12th, so maybe a month or so ago. Disabling genes in immune cells prevents obesity. Now, this is wild stuff. But we know, we just said, if you're inflamed, if you're obese, you're more inflammatory and that kind of thing. And that's where they're going with this. So scientists at Washington University School of Medicine are exploring the possibility of targeting obesity on a genetic level by switching off a specific gene in immune cells in mice. Basically, they stop the mice from getting obese. It says obesity and inflammation are intricately related. The number of macrophages in adipose or fat tissue differs depending on an individual's metabolic status. Lean humans have around 10% of the macrophages in adipose tissue, while obese people have up to 40%. And this is a very interesting thing that I first learned at a conference many years ago, that once you are very over fat, and this isn't a judgment call, this is just biology. If you are very over fat to the point of obesity, you hear terms like diabesity or, all the inflammatory problems. The fat tissue has much more of these inflammatory macrophages embedded, and it makes it much harder to lose, essentially, right? It's just the fat that you carry if you're not obese, under a microscope, the histology doesn't look the same as an obese person's adipose tissue. So that's what they're trying to follow, this line of thinking. It says by disabling the ASXL2 gene in macrophages, the researchers hypothesized that this would curb chronic low-grade inflammation in fat tissue and, in turn, help resist weight gain. In other words, fat gain here. It says the experimental model involved either genetically modifying macrophages in obese mice or injecting them with nanoparticles that specifically targeted and shut off ASXL2. So again, they're targeting this gene in these inflammatory macrophages it's embedded in the fat cells. It says, interestingly, despite being fed a high-calorie diet, the treated mice burned 45% more calories than mice with active macrophage ASXL2. Stephen L. Teitelbaum, MD, one of the authors, said, quote, these mice consumed high-fat diets, but they didn't get fatty livers. They don't get type 2 diabetes. It seems that limiting the inflammatory effects of their macrophages allows them to burn more fat, which keeps them leaner and healthier. So there you go. This was Lab Roots is where I got this from. Tara Fernandez was the science author. Actually has a PhD in cell biology. So I always like the science journalists that are they're not saying they're Tony Stark of anything. I'm not letting that go. Yeah.
Tony.
But anyway, so interesting stuff, and I think that's kind of along the lines of like, what's an action item that you might be able to consider? Well, that's why you see stuff about how fish oils may have a fat loss supportive effect, right? Because they tend to calm inflammation and stuff like that. I've seen some interesting papers about that. Eric Noreen, actually, a doc student buddy of mine, he published some stuff on fish oils and how they helped with fat loss and stuff, and so I thought that was just cool.
Yeah. I think people forget, and I obviously talk about this in the Flex Diet Cert, is that people always think of muscle as a depository or a sink, which it totally is, but people forget that fat is also a sink, right? Because excess calories are going to get converted to triglycerides and fat and shoved together, and you want the ability to shove those things out of the bloodstream and into fat cells. If your fat cells are no longer accepting that, you run into a whole host of problems on the immune side. Blood levels of triglycerides go up, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease goes up. So you actually want healthy functioning fat cells, and you want the ability to get that stuff, quote unquote, out and to shove it into fat cells. And then the next question people have is, well, how do I get leaner? I think you want to increase the flux through the fat cell. So train it to accept whatever it can to get it out of the bloodstream so you're healthier, and then increase your body's ability to use fat as a fuel, fatty acid oxidation on the other end. So you're actually just pulling more fat kind of through the fat cell as a sort of depository along the way.
Yeah. That may have been, I didn't pull the full paper. Of course, that was just a Science Journal report. But they were burning a lot more fat just by targeting these genes. This is going to lead one day to us saying, wait, I'm not sure I like the idea that you could just get an injection of nanoparticles, turn off this particular gene. I mean, there could be all kinds of other untoward side effects. You don't know. But let's say this works. Then nobody has to earn their leanness anymore. Like, right? What happens when we get to this point? It becomes almost like a humanities argument instead of a science one, right? It's like, should we do this? Is this ethically wrong? Like, somebody's working their ass off exercising, getting all the other benefits, like more mitochondrial mass and bigger muscles or whatever. And then this other guy he looks just as lean. But I guess that happens now, too. Like, people, they take some test in GH in combination, and they don't exercise very heroically, and they look amazing. So, I don't know.
I mean, the hard part is, with physiology is that there's how many decades now, and we're just so far removed from that. I mean, we can't even get one little tiny aspect of it right, much less the, pluritropic effects.
Yep. Okay. Before we go to break, I'm just going to give you a rundown because I've got more news in my hand, and I'm not going to read through all this. So we want to get to our top 3 superfoods. Next week, just look for some of these possible news bits. Potentially bad news for sucralose. So if you like your Splenda, there's some potentially bad news for it. And that makes me sad because I tend to use that. I put half a pack in my coffee and whatnot. There is a new pre-workout coming down the pike that I just saw from the IFD, and I thought, oh, well, okay, we'll report on that. And then a potential science tidbit about oranges and their components fighting obesity. And one last thing, I'd be remiss. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the American Society of Nutrition meeting that was done virtually this year. My students and I were going to head up to Seattle. Obviously, it was moved all online. But maybe we can give you a little report on that. There was some cool stuff there. We've touched on it a little, but we'll talk about some of the research we did as well with, pre-workouts and HRV and coffee and diabetes and all of the above. So, coming at you next time. Let's go to break. When we come back, top 3 superfoods from me and Mike. We'll see if our lists overlap.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you know who this is. So I'm here to tell you about Dr. Mike T. Nelson's new book, Why You Should Eat Keto. I don't do it because, look at me. Come on, I'm fabulous and I'm fantastic. Anyway, you should text the Keto ebook, all in one word, to 44222 to receive your free copy. Do it now!
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowery. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowery. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowery. You can just Google that, and full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. IronRadio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, we're back. Coach Phil is away, so the nerds are at play today. It's myself, Dr. Lonnie Lowery, and we're going to do our top 3 superfoods. We actually did not compare lists or discuss what we had beforehand. So I'll start off with my number 3 is wild blueberries. There's lots of anthocyanins in them, lots of other polyphenols. Pretty low, carbohydrates if you're trying to keep calories low. Lots of other nutrients. A good way to look at nutrient density is just different colors in food. So a lot of the colors are going to have their own kind of grouping of polyphenols. Lots of supportive data and pretty easy to find in most grocery stores also, and very tasty.
Okay. Yeah, I cheated on I also included blueberries on my list. I said oats and berries.
You're going with the 2 there.
Yeah. Because, oats, of course, have the functional food aspect of all the soluble fiber. It's a low glycemic, because of it. And then I make it like 50-50 with a mixed berries. I do both. Sometimes just blueberries, sometimes like a mix of raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. Berries bring different things to the table, each of them, like you were saying, the polyphenols and whatnot, and the antioxidants and that kind of stuff. I always remember the story, and I've told this ages ago on the podcast, I'm sure, but I was in Oxford giving a talk, and every person who was speaking there, when we had breakfast and, these sort of, and if you're from the UK, you're probably laughing, but, here, I'm a Yank, right? So I'm in these dining halls. It looks like something straight out of Harry Potter. I'm eating on a table that's 800 years old, but everybody's talking about their usual breakfasts, and to a person, they would say, yeah, berries, regular berries, blueberries, mixed berries. To me, I almost consider it like taking a supplement, like I'll take some phytochemical and pill form things, but blueberries I look at as just as potent. I mean, it's just one of the simple, healthiest things you can do. Oh, Mike, we should probably just kind of lay out. Sometimes the word superfood gets abused online. We just mean things that have either a phytochemical or a richness, nutrient density, things like that. Just foods that people should probably put in, at least think about putting in their rotation, unless they're intolerant in some way.
Agree.
Let me just quickly add, this is a cheat because I know I said oats and berries, but the alternate that I do is I make cocoa wheats. If you guys are old enough to remember cocoa wheats, I use oat bran and dark chocolate. Hershey's has an extra dark powder, and I mix it in there and I put a scoop of whey protein, and I think that's a hell of a power food kind of breakfast. So.
You could go with some raw cacao powder, too, if you want to do that. Add a little sweetener if you wanted.
True. All right, next from you, my man.
Next, number 2, I went with just grass-fed red meat.
Ooh.
In theory, I probably would have put liver, but I'm trying to be somewhat realistic on foods most people will eat, and yes, I know, like, red meat versus liver is not really a comparison, and liver is a lot higher and all that kind of stuff. I agree. I'm not disputing that, but I'm also trying to be somewhat of a realist, too, because only so many people are probably going to eat liver. But lots of heme iron, which tends to be lower, especially in female athletes. High protein. I prefer grass-fed. I mean, in terms of nutritional, I guess, amounts, I don't think it makes a huge difference, but it is kind of a different color. I like the texture better, and just personally, we get it usually from a farmer, so I like supporting people that are doing a little more sustainable things, and cows should be eating grass, probably not corn per se. So, yeah, I just went with the grass-fed T-bone steak.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. The fat composition would be different for sure.
Get a little more CLA, you get some more essential fats. It's not a massive difference. And if people have had it, like the first time we had it probably 5 years ago, we got some that was the Highland beef cattle, so kind of the old school fuzzy ones that were always kind of bred to eat grass. And the meat is just super, super dark red. It's much more almost like, not really like elk, but it's more like a wild game than the standard steaks you would buy. I mean, I really like it. I think it tastes a little bit better. And then I don't know. I think there's something, maybe I'm just programmed because I've been reading too much nutrition stuff about darker colors. To me always seem to be a little bit better, but maybe that's just a association I've got stuck in my head. And I mean, we were able to get it from a farmer directly, so we bought half a cow at once. And I compared it to if we just went to the local grocery store and bought the same meat, but just conventional, and it came out to be almost the same price. The downside was you had to buy, over 100 pounds at once, which is, a little bit more money up front. But if you know you're going to do it ahead of time, you can just kind of save. And we bought an extra freezer and stuck it in there, and it works out pretty good. Super dark red and almost a little bit more gamey, but not really. It's not as I guess you could say not as sweet tasting, if that makes sense. And then obviously your marbling is going to be completely different. It's usually substantially leaner too.
Right on. Yeah, sometimes I think about sometimes I'll tell the story to students because you watch some of these documentaries and I think it unduly influences students, but when it, like some of the graphic scenes they show of animals and whatnot, and a lot of that's true. But sometimes I'll think about how ludicrous it is. Like, could you imagine seeing a cow up on its hind legs nibbling a stalk of corn? It's not right. It's not right. Something sounds attractive about saying corn-fed beef, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that.
I think that's just what people are used to. They're used to that more marbling and that kind of thing too, which is just basically cow diabetes.
Yeah, when you hear the stuff about how they have to pump them full of antibiotics and stuff because they're feeding them so much corn, and I don't know, it's all very weird.
Yeah, and especially because they're just, the hard part is it's a whole different topic we won't go into, but if you're only caring about maximal efficiency, you're going to run into all sorts of problems because of housing all the animals next to each other and everything else. And that's unfortunately where the whole economy is kind of going, efficiency at all costs, which I would argue is actually going to have a big cost in the end. So,
yeah, we've said it before. Meat is going to become a luxury food. I know saying that to a bunch of powerlifters is not going to be popular, but it's going to get so expensive. Yeah, everything is, like you said, we're teetering everything on the banking on maximum efficiency, have stuff done as cheaply as possible or in other countries or whatever. And then look how the pandemic has laid a lot of that bare. We don't have any capacity or depth to deal with anything outside of this uber efficient plus or minus 1% range, it's good economically because for profits, but then it leaves you screwed.
And plus I think if just in terms of just risk, right? You have a lot of, single point failure. You have all these, look what happened with the COVID and the pork processing plants and things of that nature. If you've got a lot of smaller, more independent farms, you're also mitigating your risk in a lot of ways too.
Oh, so true. There's something to be said just about, the dispersion of little guy farmers instead of everything being corporatized. And Yes, indeed.
What do you have for number 2?
My number 2, it's a food ingredient, and I know you can't take this probably. You'd have to eat until your teeth turned yellow. But I like curcumin, and I know we said we wouldn't do it with a pill. I know you can't, as a pill, you can get a stronger dose, and like we're talking about, you can add, the black pepper, the bioperine, and all that kind of stuff to try to enhance the uptake. But cooking with, turmeric, curry powder, all that kind of stuff, I do think if you do it a lot, it's still going to add up over time. It's one of the very few phytochemicals that I'm impressed enough with that I actually take fairly regularly. It's just for the anti-inflammatory and potential cognitive kind of benefits and that sort of thing. I suppose if you go down that rabbit hole, you could talk about resveratrol, in peanuts or different foods as well. I'm just not as pumped up about resveratrol. I know it makes some lab animals live longer, but I keep getting this weird indication when I read that literature that it's doing some things that I don't necessarily like. And I'd have to go back and actually read through some of that stuff to give you specifics on that. But there was always that little bit of weirdness with resveratrol. Like maybe we're tinkering with something that could go in a less beneficial direction. And I didn't get quite as much of that out of the curcumin stuff. So I'm including that on my list, partly because I actually take that. There's 2 kinds that I get off of Amazon, both from the Now company, and I'm not working for them or anything. One's curcumin and one's curcumin phytosome, and they're just 2 different ways to help you absorb more. So as people age, and we talked about as if you're over fat, inflammation's always a problem, and it's just a nice, strong food source, anti-inflammatory. So kind of cheating with that one maybe. But Maurice Bano said something about, you just can't eat enough in the powder form. And I get it. But if we're trying to stick to food and food ingredients, eating a lot of Indian foods and stuff like that, because of everything else that's involved as well, not bad. Not bad for the anti-inflammatory thing.
Yeah, I've been testing a product that has a little bit of coconut oil, turmeric, curcumin, what else? Ginger, black pepper. So one other thing I'm forgetting in there, and it's in a liquid. And I don't know. I haven't noticed like a huge difference per se. I mean, I think it probably helps, but I didn't have a lot of joint pain or a lot of high inflammation beforehand either. I just thought I would try it for a period of weeks, see if I notice any difference. So yeah,
right on. Okay, what's number 3 for you?
So I had as number 1, so 3rd on the list, but in the number 1 spot, I had Alaskan Sockeye salmon.
Oh, nice.
You get a good source of essential fatty acids, right? Omega-3s, EPA, DHA specifically, right? Your classic fish oils. Lots of protein. That's a wild source because, unfortunately, the farm-raised versions are now paradoxically low in fish oils because of the feed source, and that's a whole nother issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then, again, sticking with the theme of kind of colors here, you do get some of Astaxanthin in there.
Yeah.
Which is a red carotenoid. It's one of those I've looked at for quite a while, maybe 5 years ago. I even proposed it as part of a fat burner to a company. That was based on mostly animal data. The animal data was really impressive, showing longer swim times, dramatic increases in the use of fat as a fuel. It's not a stimulatory. It actually has some benefits in other tissues, especially in eye muscle metabolism, skin, possibly wrinkles. But the human performance data on it hasn't really panned out all that well. But it doesn't seem to spin off a lot of free radicals either, even in pretty high doses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those that more research keeps coming out. I think it's interesting, and red-colored fish are probably the best source of it. You can get it in krill and other things like that too, but man, you would need to eat a ton of krill.
It's funny you say that. Well, first, let me say, Mike, this is a too neutral and too sober, you scientist. You're not selling it hard. This is very
I gotta have stock in astaxanthin
calm.
and sell the shit out of that stuff.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Be the Tony Stark of astaxanthin.
Yeah.
I'm not letting that go today. But especially because of the people I know in fitness, you're probably the closest to that with your engineering background and everything. Anyway, yeah, there's some astaxanthin in the krill oil. I throw in a couple of krill oil along with my triple strength, like EPA, DHA focused pills. It's not probably enough to do much. But I just think, well, it's not going to hurt. I'll trickle it in like so many things. I mean, in our house, we kind of take that approach even with meds. Like if I can take half a packet of Splenda or half a dose of ibuprofen or half an aspirin, I try to get away with that. I don't want to sound like I'm what are the some of those groups that, they're anti-medicine altogether, and I'm not at all. I just don't want to, down-regulate and numb myself or overdo it, like people talk about how Tom Cruise... Scientologists. Yeah, you could tell I'm not... I don't follow that stuff, but yeah, it's like they won't take medicines, at least reportedly, and some of this stuff, and I'm like, oh boy. I don't know. It's not what I'm trying to do. But anyway, so by the same token, when I get some nutrients, again, like astaxanthin, I think, well... I'll trickle it in. Is it a efficacious acute dose? No, but if it's something that's already in my krill oil, all right, little bonus. And to your point, they're nice little red things. So
yeah, I do take astaxanthin more before I go on a kiteboard trip if I'm going to be outside a lot.
Yes,
and I don't know. I haven't seen any data looking at reduction of possibly head trauma risk, but in theory it might because it's such a good antioxidant. It does appear to be sort of pseudo water and fat soluble. I haven't looked to see if it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And then also because I'm in the sun a fair amount, I have noticed, because I have pretty light skin, that it does seem to reduce the risk of me kind of burning just in case. So I figure, doesn't appear to be too many downsides. Again, I'm not using it in place of, covering up or wearing sunscreen, but as an additional line of protection, I think it's something I usually do just to give it a go.
Yeah, I've even seen fish oils, right? EPA, DHA serving a little bit of protective thing against like, sunburn and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. What dose do you take of the astaxanthin? Just asking.
Yeah, so I take it kind of periodically, and actually gone up in the dose. So I take anywhere from 8 to 12 milligrams, 5 out of 7 days per week, which is pretty high.
That seems high, yeah.
Like most of the stuff I've seen lately appears, at least in humans, to be going to a higher and higher dose on it.
Interesting.
And I haven't seen anything that has a negative effect at that dosage. Last thing, too, there's some very interesting data about astaxanthin helping people who have kind of eye fatigue or even dry eyes, because the eye muscles are super oxidative and they spin off a lot more free radicals. So I've used that in a few clients who just have just weird sort of eye fatigue we can't quite figure out. Obviously, they've gone to their physician, everything is fine, and again, anecdotal, but appears to help with that, too. So people have that going on.
Right on. Okay, we're winding down here. Coffee, I mentioned that earlier. Obviously, there's hundreds of antioxidant type of bioactives, in coffee. Chlorogenic acid, probably the main one, and that's what we're interested in, like trying to enhance carbohydrate metabolism, even in younger people, if we can. The two-edged sword with coffee, of course, is that the caffeine, if it overstimulates like epinephrine or norepi release or, your sympathetic drive, it's actually going to harm, if you will, blood sugar. It's going to raise blood sugar acutely. But that's where the stuff with, and if you read this stuff even through 2020, there almost seems to be this discrepancy where acutely coffee, and we give both decaf and regular coffee, but to try to control for the caffeine thing. But acutely, sometimes you'll see different effects. Better or worse as far as blood sugar coming down. Chronically, though, there's more agreement, I would think, that probably the slow trickle in of these phytochemicals like the chlorogenic acid probably add up over time. And let's face it, it's not just blood sugar control. There's a lot of stuff about, coffee's dopaminergic, so it could help reduce Parkinson's by kicking out some dopamine there that maybe wasn't coming earlier, without it. Just a lot of things. So I think coffee is going to be on my list. I mean, I researched that stuff for a reason. I'm fascinated by it. It's a cheap, potentially cheap way to get some serious antioxidants, maybe help your blood sugar, probably help brain activity too. There's the obvious attention. And Mike and I were talking when we were off mic just a moment ago about how a lot of the pre-workouts and stuff like that, they lean very heavily on caffeine. It's a good drug in itself. A lot of the stimulants they've come out with, they tend to have a downside in some way, or they're more easily abused. And caffeine, of course, you can hurt yourself with it if you're really stupid. But yeah, I think coffee is just this nice mix of things. And of course, it's got a lot of phytochemicals. I mean, what is it? It's crushed up beans, coffee bean berries that you run water through, either cold or hot water, depending on what you want to extract from them. So,
was that number 3 or was that number 1?
Oh, I'm sorry. My best, right? My number one.
Your top one.
So, well, it depends. I mean, in gross intake, I probably eat the oats and berries the most.
Sure.
But yeah, coffee fascinates me the most, and again, that's why I research it, right? I just think even for a pre-workout, it's one of the best things you can do. I know it sounds a little hippy-dippy for me to say just go for the natural food source. If you want to get the extra caffeine and you're like, oh, to hell with the the blood sugar right now, Lowry, I got to squat 500 pounds. Okay, well, maybe get some Robusta beans, Death Wish or something, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I always find that kind of stuff is fascinating, just the amount of polyphenols and stuff like coffee, wine, even cannabis, just other things that are kind of consumed, and all how they're so sensitive to, where it's grown, what were the conditions, how is it processed, what type of bean, the genetics, and just all the different variations we have of just both the raw material and the process. You end up with all these slight variabilities and subtleties to it. It's way more complicated than you would expect it to be from the outside, just looking in.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. I mean, there's whole papers on some of this stuff, that you can dig this, you can go really deep into this rabbit hole. I do want to add an honorable mention, and because it's controversial, just food for thought, right? But I think tomatoes are very interesting. There is stuff, because some people, of course, are anti-tomatoes. They're like, oh, nightshade, it's going to make your joints seize up. And there are all these kinds of, things that I've heard people talk about. I've heard some chiropractors talk about that. But the upside is, again, there's a lot of interesting colors, to our point before, and phytochemicals in tomatoes, not only in preventing prostate problems, but even treating them. And I think that's very interesting stuff. So
from
tomatoes... Exactly. They seem to have enough potency to even be used in a treatment kind of way, according to at least some papers. And if you're on a low carb diet or that kind of thing, they're not a high carbohydrate, starchy kind of vegetable. So I'll throw some like salsa on my eggs, and like fresh salsa. I don't know. It's just, like I said, a little honorable mention, especially because it's controversial. Some people would like that approach, some wouldn't. But I think some of the interesting stuff as I get older, when I hear stuff about, and again, you men out there, you might not have heard about this, but when you're young, your prostate's quite small, like walnut sized. By the time you're my age, it's probably, between golf ball and apple. I don't know. I'm exaggerating a little, but it naturally gets bigger over time, and eventually you're going to have a problem with urine flow and that kind of stuff. And I want to avoid that. I just want to avoid that, especially you guys who have, if you've used testosterone throughout your lives and that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing you're going to have to keep an eye on. So just saying. So Mike, I'm unfair if I don't give you that chance, though. Is there an honorable mention out of you?
I would say honorable mention's a tie between either broccoli or spinach. Just some green food. Usually green foods have higher levels of magnesium. A lot of people are low in magnesium. They just don't get enough. And lots of polyphenols, lots of good fiber, super low calorie if you're especially trying to reduce calories.
Yeah.
So if I had to go with the honorable mention and be kind of a tie between those two.
Yeah, I'm totally down with the broccoli as well. And I purposely eat spinach as well. Yep. Okay.
Pretty easy to get.
Right, yeah, and I mean, everybody, we're not going to give you a meal plan, but the more you can at least look into these and consider them, and again, if you're not intolerant in some way, probably the better quality your diet is going to be. Like I said, lots of these phytochemicals or nutrient density, like Mike's talking about magnesium and things like that. So it could be vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals. These are high on the list, and this is from two guys who, we look at this for a long time. And these are personally things we do. So,
yeah. And then now there's even a backlash against vegetables of all things, which I find crazy. And I get it. If you have a pathology, you've got SIBO, you need low FODMAP, or you've got digestive issues. Yeah, I get it. There's a time and place. You probably need to pull some of those things out. But I would say at a population level, people are confused now and think vegetables are bad. Just seems crazy to me.
Yeah, it really depends, I think, who you're running with, because the food technology magazines I get every month, there's a big spread about plant foods. And I think the documentary, The Game Changers, I think it was, that Arnold did, and it just confused the issue even more. Eat plants all the time, only plants all the time, and I don't think that's good either. But you're right.
Yeah.
If you're running with the carnivore crowd, you're right. You're going to get really mixed messages, and that's why we're boring and balanced here.
Yeah. It's just funny that the fitness world is like so extreme. So you have to be vegan and increase only plants, and then you've got carnivore that's like, no, don't eat those vile weeds. What are you doing? They're horrible for your health.
Vile weeds.
In the middle are like, I don't know what to do. I'm so confused.
Yeah. Well, and nutrigenetics is part of the problem with all this, right? Because people are going to respond better to one thing or another, and you're just going to have to experiment a little bit and learn as much as you can.
Yep.
All right. Well, we are out of time, so thanks, my man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And
see you next
we'll
time.
Be back next week.
Right on. Hey, listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store, one for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowery, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers,
and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.